So Eli just got braces. He's 17, and he wants to grow up to become a writer. So by definition, that makes his mouth, well, he wants to grow up to become a rapper. So by definition, that makes his mouth his instrument. So imagine slapping training wheels onto the bicycle of a Tour de France champion. In an attempt to straighten him out, the world has bent him crooked, forcing him to stumble where he used to run. And I am Eli's poetry performance teacher. So that makes my job today really funny. Whenever he speaks, it's like Dylan going electric. There's suddenly all of this static that didn't used to be there. When he reads his poetry, it kind of sounds like an angry river screaming at a newly built dam. And while checking out his reflection in the window of the classroom we were working in, he says to me in a voice more parcel-tongued than English, "Yo, in the right light, these braces sort of look like a platinum grill." Yeah. And I say, "Well, that's very gangster, young Jeezy. That's very gangster. Now read your poem." And he does, over and over, slowly gaining footing in this awkward little war where every syllable feels like a traitor. A soldier breaking rank on the front line. Every word is a forgetful sinner tumbling out of a confessional half clean. His tongue is relearning how to navigate the newly hostile topography of his mouth. It's a wolf pacing in its cage at the zoo. And after forcing him to read the same poem 20 times in a row, he would maul me if he could. And I love him for it. He's my kind of poet, right? His hand-me-down clothes fit his skinny figure like an older brother that he doesn't have, dragging him to a dinner at home that won't be there. He always seems to be coming from some place where he probably shouldn't have been, which is actually anywhere if you give him enough time and there aren't any cameras. He treats his middle finger like it's his prized possession, and if he thinks he knows more than you do about the subject you are trying to teach him, he's suddenly deaf. He's the reason I keep writing, because if I can't say something that will make him listen, then it probably wasn't worth trying to say in the first place, right? See, he's honest like that. An uneducated man would call him slightly criminal, but really the word is honest, because he simply cannot afford to be anything else. And I say to him, honesty does not always mean just telling the truth. Honesty means saying what you have to say, regardless of what the outcome might be. And he says, after thinking about that for a little while, "Dude, that doesn't make any sense." And I say, "Well, you don't make any sense." And he says, "Yes, I do. And you know what else? You know who else had braces? Forrest Gump. He had leg braces, and he turned out to be the fastest dude in all of Alabama. So what does that say about me, son? What does that say about me?" And I say, "Well, run, Forrest. Run." And we both laugh out loud for the first time today. And his open mouth looks like an armory, like two perfectly aligned, glinting rows of swords. And I think to myself, well, that's the trick, isn't it? The brightest things in this world are so often also the sharpest, that we fear for our own fingers too much to hold on to our own shine sometimes, convincing ourselves that our mouths are just black holes full of dangerous things that we need to dull the edges of in order to fit in, so we can speak in this language of stop signs, slow down. You're too young. You don't understand. Your arms are still so skinny. These weak things, aspen branches blowing in the wind as if they're trying to hold on to the storm that wants to break them in the first place. We convince ourselves that our bodies are not strong enough to hold on to the velocity of our hearts, so we just let them go. And I see this young man, this factory of sound and song, this boy who is so much faster than this world's expectations of him. And he does not yet know how uncrashable he actually is. That his head is a steering wheel, that his heart is a gas pedal, and that his mouth is a sun. His mouth is a sun where all of their expectations and road signs will go to burn. His mouth is an instrument, and this poem is his song, and he is standing before me, and he is reading his song to me. He is playing it to me over and over until he almost gets it right. He is playing it over and over until it's honest, until that metal in his mouth no longer resembles a weapon, but a tuning fork. And I swear that this is true. because the melody that is coming out of him, it's pitch perfect. It's perfect. Thank you. So I'm gonna try to slow myself down, but I'll be honest with you, my heart gets really excited and I just sort of go sometimes. So we're just gonna bear with it, right? Okay, so my junior year of high school, my mother is at the parent-teacher conference night with my creative writing teacher, Jared Parsons, and he tells her that I'm at the top of his class. And she says, well, that's really good because he's failing everything else, and he wants to be a writer when he grows up. And Jared just sort of shakes his head, and he says, no, he doesn't want to be a writer. He is a writer. That's the most important thing someone has ever told me, for two reasons. One, it's the first time a teacher told me I was good at something that wasn't illegal. And two, because it was definitive, right? There was no pesky potential, no could be. There only was he is, so he could, which means to me, I am a writer, so I can write. I am, so I can. Now this becomes my compass, my identity, becomes how I navigate the world around me. It's the most important thing, being a writer. Anything else is secondary, and if it gets in the way, I just get rid of it, right? So like my job wants me to work more hours, where I would rather be writing. I quit my job. My girlfriend wants me to spend more time with her and less time writing. I quit my girlfriend, and I write some poems about it. College wants me to study more. I drop out of college. Woo! So dropping out of college because it's hindering your ability to write is kind of like dropping out of an airplane because it's hindering your ability to fly. And I did not fly. I fell. But I fell gracefully and somehow managed to eventually learn how to make a living as a writer. And mostly it's from traveling around and reading my poems to people. But I'm also lucky enough to be the executive director for an arts literacy program that works with young people and tries to empower them through the mediums of poetry, performance, and particularly slam poetry. Now this work that we do is very often called teaching artist work. Right? That's a funny term, teaching artist. And from an artist standpoint, it's a tiny bit defeatist, right? Because of that stupid thing that we don't want to admit that we buy into, but we do, which is those who can't do, or those who can do and those who can't teach. Okay, I'm gonna lead this one, all right? Ready? We're gonna do this. 1, 2, 3. Do it with me. Boo! Right? Okay, the truth of the matter is, in order to be a good artist, you also have to be a teacher. What is art if not something that we learn from, right? That's the truth of the matter. And honestly, being a teacher and a performance poet have very similar job descriptions sometimes. Designing a great lesson plan is a lot like writing a good poem. It's just something that you create, a journey that you lead someone in that hopefully they take something away from. And we both have to know how to control an audience, right? And I'll tell you, teachers, y'all deal with much tougher audiences than most of the poets that I know. And I've walked into a classroom and I felt like I was about to be booed off of the stage. And I've walked into a classroom and I felt like every single seat contained its own little hallelujah, right? That the entire room was expanding in one gigantic standing ovation, okay? And that's where the best poetry in the world is written. It's written in those dark corners of classrooms. And so I grew up in the early 90s. That's where I was going to school, was the 90s. And especially the early 90s is a time I like to magically refer to as the golden age of Ritalin. Because it seemed like you couldn't be a kid and say a cuss word and not have a pill fly into your mouth faster than you could shut it. My generation felt like the guinea pigs of this new social norm that would be feeding kids pills in order to starve off their anger. And I'm not saying it doesn't work, but I'm saying that to me, and a lot of people I've worked with, it feels like you're diseased somehow, that this anger is something that needs to be cured, that it's not actually just a natural reaction to the world around you, right? Anger is your body's alarm. It's something that tells you when something is wrong and to defend yourself, and we do not shun porcupines for bristling their quills when they're attacked. So why would we do the same thing to a child, right? And so the basis of teaching artist work really is to teach them to focus this anger. We tell them to take those quills, fill them with ink, and then tell their story with it. And that is the basis for all great art. It's what Lorca would refer to as the duende, taking passion and pain and placing it into something and then giving it to the world, right? Even screaming blindly into the darkness because no one will hear you, that's the first note in a song. Swinging your fists randomly at nothing, that's the first part of a dance. And reminding kids that they can do this, reminding them by practicing, teaching them, and giving them tools to practice what is arguably the world's oldest art form, poetry, is actually kind of invaluable, and it's an amazing tool. And that's the thing about it, is that we're not teaching them. They already know how to do it. DNA, poetry is in our DNA. It's as regular for us as fire and farming. It's just something you do. This moment, right here, a TED Talk is the basis for poetry. It's us standing around the village fire, sharing stories with our peers, communicating. It's what we do. We're meant to do this, right? To stand in a stage or in a room and tell people, I am, and I am from, and I can. Now, this reminds me of one of the greatest writing prompts for teaching poetry to kids that I've ever found in my life. It's extremely simple, and I learned it from my good friends Mahogany Brown and Jive Poetic from New York City. Take a piece of paper, draw a line down the center. On one side, you say, I am from. And on the other side, you say, I am. And then the student fills out those columns, right? Now, the magic trick about this is that they've already written the poem just by filling out the sheet. You've tricked them into doing something that they already know how to do. And what's best about that is then they can take those and arrange it in any way they see fit, or any way you ask them to see fit. So we're in Sydney, Australia, in Redfern at the Young, Black, and Deadly Conference, and we're teaching this workshop and using that prompt, and I meet this dude named Mark Anthony. Mark Anthony is 11, and he's as awesome as he sounds, right? Because his name is Mark Anthony, and Mark Anthony's absolute passion is professional wrestling. He loves it. Now, he's just not some weak fan or some weekend warrior. We're talking Ultimate Warrior, Hulk Hogan, WrestleMania 1990. This dude knows his stuff, and he loves it, and he's convinced that he can't write a poem, right? Even though he's filled out the sheet. And the I am section is literally just facts about wrestling. And the I am from section is talking about the violence in his neighborhood, which apparently is a lot, especially in the community that he came from. And so we just start talking about wrestling. And I'm like, yo, dude, so who's your favorite wrestler? And he's like, Jake the Snake Roberts. And I'm like, why? He's like, because he had the best move. And I'm like, what's the best move? He's like, the DDT. And I'm like, what's the DDT? And he's like, it's when you grab a dude like this with the head and you fall back and bam, take him out. I'm like, that sounds like it hurts. He's like, it does. I'm like, have you ever seen that in real life? He's like, yeah, well, kind of. A couple weeks ago, my neighbor was getting pulled out of his house by the cops, and the cop had him in a headlock, and he fell back and bam. And I said, what did you just say? He just said, well, the cops DDT'd my neighbor. I'm like, write that down, man. And he did. And it clicked, and he wrote a poem, and it was not long. And it was most certainly not pretty, but it was honest. And he used all of these wrestling metaphors to describe the violence in his community. And the magic part of it, though, is that only he could have written that poem. That was his story, and that's what made it, in a way, something beautiful. And I've been lucky enough in my weirdness to be able to see this in Sydney, in East High School, in Denver, Colorado, to a national poetry slam where one kid is standing in front of 3,000 of his peers saying, I am from, and I am, and therefore I can. And the thing about this is that to this day, I still have not earned my college degree. Trust me, it's on my bucket list. I do know I'm talking to a room full of teachers. But ironically, I've written close to 40 recommendation letters for colleges, universities, and scholarship programs because every kid who has ever been a member of a Denver Youth Slam team has gone on to college, including Eli, except for one dude, and his name is Brando, and he's a National Poetry Slam champion and full-time touring artist, which honestly is not bad work if you can get it. So I could continue to sit here and wax poetic about the importance of providing open space for young people to express themselves, or I could actually just do it. So I'd like to welcome to the stage Brave New Voices International Youth Poetry Slam champion and college freshman, Amal Kassir.
Before acquainted with diction, my prayers were so sloppy, practically slipping off the paper. But finally, when I learned to tame the little things, it was like handcuffs were broken off of my wrists. See, it's a terrifying thing to learn that your fingers are drenched in humanity's hope. It's a terrifying thing to learn that you have the power to control soldiers of truth and write songs of freedom. My words all come from the cultivation of struggle. The usri and yusra, the bumps and the ease straighten me up like a minaret. My fingers wrapped around pens like prayer beads. My call to prayer is the sound of humanity's distress. Because when the sky drops bombs And there's blood in the rivers, and the news tells lies, and freedom fighters are getting their tongues cut out. Ink is the only thing that resembles truth in a place on fire, and this world is on fire. Besides, it's always the poets that get arrested first. Handwritten riots, they shatter corporate glass windows. We are the upholstery of the earth. We are the foot-to-foot, shoulder-to-shoulder of a Friday prayer. Our tongues don't know dust. We are sustainers, maintainers, providers. We are educators. We weave bulletproof vests made out of historical accuracy to protect our children from things like ignorance, from things like silence. We are not silent. We cannot be silent. I am not silent. I was created. I am now a threat to the Western misconceptions. They handed me the very tool by people who mispronounced my name, and now my sloppy prayers are constitutions. Because when you're in a place on fire, and the only thing that resembles truth is ink, the only thing you can do is pick up a pen. And that's what I did. Thank you. It's entirely essential for me to thank Ken Arkind personally.
See you guys later.
Yeah,
Thanks.
we'll see you guys later. I love him, so give it up for Ken Arkind, please.